Sophia sat alone at the kitchen table, her fingers hovering over the keys of her laptop. The glow of the screen was the only light in the room, casting long, shadowed figures across the cluttered table. The low hum of the refrigerator filled the silence, a monotonous reminder of the stillness around her. Her coffee, once hot and comforting, now sat forgotten in a chipped mug, cold as the emptiness inside her. The bills were stacked in front of her: electricity, water, internet, gas. Each one a small reminder of the weight she carried every single day, a weight that no one in her family seemed to notice. She had done this for years, dutifully paying each bill, managing the family's finances with a precision that had become second nature. Her eyes flicked over the numbers, but they no longer made sense to her. The figures blurred together as her mind drifted. She could hear her parents in the next room, oblivious to her silent struggle. Michael, her father, was likely sprawled out in his recliner, remote in hand, tuned into the same news channel he'd been watching for hours. Sharon, her mother, would be sitting beside him, probably crocheting or absent-mindedly scrolling through her phone. They didn't know the exhaustion she felt. They didn't know that it wasn't just about the bills or the house or the routine that she had so carefully built for them. No, it was the quiet, crushing realization that they saw her as nothing more than a machine. The one who made sure everything ran smoothly, the one who kept the lights on, the one who carried it all. But no one ever asked if she needed help. No one ever checked in to see if she was okay. Sophia's fingers moved, almost mechanically, punching in the numbers and clicking submit. Another bill paid, another day of being the invisible one. The house felt more like a tomb than a home, a place where the weight of her sacrifices was buried beneath a mountain of routine. And yet, they never noticed. They never even stopped to thank her. The irony of it all hit her like a blow to the chest. She was the one who kept the family afloat, and yet she felt more alone than ever. Michael had been out of work for years after the accident. His fall had shattered his hip and his confidence. Once a strong, steadfast man, he had turned into someone who sat idly by, too content in his own self-pity to even lift a finger. And Sharon, her health had deteriorated too, leaving Sophia to pick up the slack. Her mother's relentless neediness never ceased. But still, Sophia kept her head down, doing what needed to be done. She had always been the one to carry the burden. "Sophia, honey, are you almost done?" Sharon's voice broke through her thoughts, soft, tinged with the all-too-familiar undercurrent of dependency. "Your dad's wondering if we've got enough for pizza tonight." Sophia pinched the bridge of her nose, closing her eyes briefly to calm the flood of frustration rising in her chest. She wanted to scream, to tell them what she felt, but the words got lost in her throat, strangled by years of silence. "Yeah, Mom, I'm on it." "Pizza's covered," she called back, her voice steady, betraying none of the turmoil inside. She clicked submit on the final payment and leaned back in her chair. The wood creaked under her weight, the faintest sound that somehow echoed in the quiet of the room. She stared at the confirmation page, the little green checkmark mocking her. Another month down, another load carried. It all began years ago, when Michael had fallen, and the slow unraveling of their family began. His injury, his inability to return to work, had turned him into someone unrecognizable. Once, he had been the rock, the steady hand that had provided for his family. But now, he was nothing more than a man who had given up on life, content to sit in his chair, watching reruns and letting life pass him by. Sharon, too, had settled into this new normal: no work, no responsibilities. It was as if they had both decided, without saying it out loud, that they had earned their rest. And Sophia, the youngest, the one who had always been there, had quietly stepped into the role they had left behind. No questions asked, but that was when things changed. Years passed, and things didn't get better. The hospital visits, the doctor's appointments, the bills piling up. Sophia didn't mind helping. She never did, but deep down, she began to wonder if this was it. Was she always going to be the one who held the family together? Was she always going to be the one who made sure everything worked, who took care of everyone else's needs while hers were left behind? She wasn't just tired of paying bills. She was tired of being invisible, and yet, she kept going. Why? Because she couldn't imagine a world without this routine, without her role in their lives. She wasn't sure who she was without them. But what if everything she had been doing was a lie? What if there was more to the story than she knew? What if she had been living a life built on someone else's expectations? What if she wasn't even really their daughter? The realization came like a slow burn, building up inside her until it was too much to ignore. And once she saw it, once she realized the truth, there was no turning back, but that is a story for later. Before we dive deeper into this journey, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Your support means the world to us and keeps us motivated to create more engaging content just for you. Now, here's a question for you. Do you believe someone can truly carry the weight of their family's burdens without ever being acknowledged, or does the silence eventually break them? A yes. Some people are built to handle it, and it doesn't break them. B no. Eventually everyone needs to be seen and appreciated, or they will burn out. Drop your answer in the comments below. Let's talk about it. Sophia had long ago accepted the role of the family's anchor, the one who made sure the boat stayed afloat. It wasn't something she had chosen, it was something that had quietly settled upon her shoulders, like a heavy coat she could never take off. Over time, she stopped questioning it. It had become the air she breathed. It was only when she caught a glimpse of herself in the kitchen window one evening, exhausted from another long day of working and managing the house, that she realized how deeply this responsibility had shaped her. Every morning, as the sun rose, Sophia would rise too earlier than she wanted, earlier than was fair. The silence of the house would wrap around her like a suffocating blanket as she tiptoed around, preparing breakfast and getting ready for her long hours at work. Then, before she left, she would quietly make her way to the kitchen table, where the stack of bills awaited her, like silent sentinels, relentless and unforgiving. Each envelope seemed to remind her that her work was never truly done. There was always something more to be paid, more to be done. She was always the one who had to make sure everything was in place. She glanced over at her parents, who were typically scattered around the house, living their own quiet lives, each lost in their own world. Michael, her father, had been out of work for years after his accident, and since then, his world had contracted to the confines of his favorite recliner. He rarely left the chair now, except to shuffle slowly to the kitchen or to make his way to the bathroom. His disability had not only robbed him of his ability to work, but it had robbed him of his drive, his sense of purpose. He was there physically, but emotionally, he had checked out long ago. Sharon, her mother, had her own battles. Chronic health issues meant that she couldn't contribute in the way she once had. Sophia had watched as her mother's once vibrant energy slowly faded, replaced by long hours of fatigue, illness, and frustration, and so, Sophia had stepped into the void. There were no grand discussions, no dramatic moments where she was formally handed the mantle of caretaker. It had just happened. One bill at a time, one responsibility after another, she had become the unseen force keeping the household moving. Every day felt the same. She would work a full day, then come home to take care of the household, cooking, cleaning, running errands. The tasks piled up, never truly finished, and it wasn't just the physical work. It was the mental exhaustion that came from knowing she was always the one who had to manage it all. No one ever asked if she needed help. No one ever stopped to see if she was okay. And slowly, imperceptibly, it began to gnaw at her. She had grown to expect nothing from her parents. There were no words of thanks, no acknowledgement of her efforts. Michael and Sharon never seemed to notice that the lights stayed on because of her, that the refrigerator was always full because of her, that the bills were always paid because of her. They lived in a world where everything just worked, and they didn't need to understand how. Sophia had convinced herself that she didn't need that recognition. She didn't need their gratitude or applause. She just needed to make sure everything ran smoothly. But as the years went on, she began to wonder if this was what life had become. Was she just a machine, endlessly servicing the needs of others without ever being truly seen? It was an uncomfortable thought, but it was the truth, and it stung. It wasn't that she resented her parents, not exactly. She loved them, despite their shortcomings. But she couldn't help but feel like they had chosen a different version of life. Michael had chosen to accept his fate, to let go of his ambitions and let the world continue without him. Sharon, too, had settled into her own passive rhythm. Their world had become smaller, and they had simply stopped trying. And Sophia had kept going. She kept picking up the pieces. The bills, the chores, the emotional labor. She kept the house running, and in doing so, she kept her family together, in a way. She became the glue, the force that held everything together. And yet, in the quiet moments, when the house was still and everyone else was lost in their own world, she felt it. She felt the weight. It wasn't just the weight of the responsibilities, it was the weight of being invisible. Her role had been defined for her without her consent. No one had asked her if she wanted to carry this burden. No one had asked her if it was too much, they just assumed. And she had never known how to say no. She had never known how to put herself first. She had learned early that being the one who took care of things was what was expected of her. It had become her identity, and slowly, the lines between her sense of self and the role she had adopted became blurred. But somewhere in the quiet, somewhere between paying the bills and managing the household, she began to ask herself, was this all there was for her? Was this her purpose, to be the one who always made sure everything was okay for everyone else, while her own needs went unnoticed? To always give, to always serve, to always sacrifice. The worst part, the part that twisted in her chest like a knife, was that she wasn't even the older sibling. She wasn't even the one who was supposed to carry this weight. Harper, her sister, was supposed to be the one who stepped up, the one who took charge, but Harper had never had to. Harper had always been the golden child, the one who could escape responsibility with a smile and a carefree attitude. She had the freedom to live her life however she wanted, and Sophia. She was the one who stayed behind, the one who kept everything running. And in that moment, as she sat in the quiet of the kitchen, staring at the latest bill, the weight of it all pressed down on her, it wasn't the bills, or the house, or the work, it was the crushing realization that no one had ever truly seen her. She wasn't just tired, she was broken, and she wasn't sure how much longer she could keep carrying it all on her own. Sophia had always been the one to make everything work, but now she wasn't sure if she could do it any longer. The truth was, she didn't want to be the strong one anymore. She didn't want to be the one who made everything okay for everyone else. She didn't want to be invisible, but where did she go from here? What did she do when the weight of responsibility had been the only thing keeping her afloat? Sophia had spent years silently keeping her family's world intact, never once questioning the weight of it all. Her role had always been clear. She was the one who handled the hard, unseen work, the one who made sure the pieces fit together. But that night, as she sat in the dim light of the living room, the silence around her felt heavier than usual, suffocating. The routine of paying bills, of keeping the house running, had started to feel like a quiet prison, one she had built herself but didn't know how to escape. She sat at the kitchen table, the faint glow of her laptop screen reflecting on her tired face. The stack of old family documents had been pushed aside for weeks, forgotten in the corners of her mind, but tonight something made her reach for them. Maybe it was the growing sense that her efforts were all in vain. Maybe it was the quiet resentment she had started to harbor toward her parents. Or maybe it was the nagging feeling that something was wrong. The papers felt strange in her hands, as if they carried more than just legal jargon. They felt like a secret waiting to be uncovered. Her fingers trembled slightly as she flipped through the old, yellowing pages. She had never paid much attention to these documents before. They were just part of the background noise of her life, the formalities that had always seemed unimportant compared to the bigger, more pressing responsibilities. But tonight, as the darkness of the house closed in around her, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more hidden in these papers. Sophia's heart skipped a beat as she noticed a small, sealed envelope tucked away between the pages. It was unmarked, with only a faint, smudged handwriting on the front, just one word, Will. The envelope felt cold in her hands, as if it held the chill of something long buried. Her breath caught in her throat. She had never been told about a will. Her parents had never discussed it with her. They never had to, she thought, because she had always been there, quietly picking up the pieces. But now, as she stared at the envelope, the silence felt louder. She knew she should leave it. She knew that whatever was inside, whatever truth it might hold, was better left untouched. But she couldn't bring herself to do it. Her curiosity, her need to understand, was stronger than the fear of what she might find. Sophia's fingers moved instinctively, tearing open the envelope with a sense of urgency that matched the racing of her heart. Inside, there was a single sheet of paper, the edges yellowed with age. She unfolded it slowly, almost reverently, as though each movement might somehow change the meaning of what she was about to read. Her eyes scanned the text quickly, but the words seemed to blur together at first. It wasn't until she read the opening lines that her breath caught in her chest. To our daughter, Harper Rogers, we bequeath all our worldly possessions, including, but not limited to the family home, all bank accounts, and any remaining assets. The words echoed in her mind, reverberating like a bell ringing in the silence of the room. Harper, it couldn't be, there had to be some mistake. The words didn't make sense. She wasn't just reading about Harper inheriting everything. They had written it out clearly, without hesitation, without a second thought. Sophia's hands shook as she reread the lines. Her eyes stung with something she couldn't quite name: hurt, anger, disbelief. How could they do this to her? The question burned in her chest, so sharp and raw that it threatened to overwhelm her. She had spent years of her life, silently ensuring their comfort, quietly sacrificing her own dreams, her own needs, so that they could live in peace, and yet, here it was. Everything she had worked for, everything she had given, was being handed to Harper. The one who had never been there, the one who had never had to do any of it. The one who had been free to chase her dreams, to live her life without the weight of responsibility that Sophia had carried alone. Sophia closed her eyes, as if trying to will the truth away, but the words were already etched in her mind. They were real. She could feel the betrayal like a physical weight on her chest, suffocating her. It wasn't just about the house, or the money, or the things that had been left behind. It was the fact that her parents had never truly seen her. They had never once acknowledged the sacrifices she had made for them. They had never once recognized the quiet work, the endless hours of care and responsibility that she had poured into keeping them comfortable. And now, in the most final, irreversible way possible, they had erased her from their legacy. Her eyes fell to the rest of the will. There was nothing about her. Not even a mention, not a word of thanks, not a line that said anything about the life she had given up to take care of them. She wasn't even a footnote in the story of her own family, just ... gone. The bitterness rose up in her throat like a wave, threatening to swallow her whole. How could they do this? How could they give everything to Harper, who had never been there when they needed her most? It wasn't fair. It wasn't right. The anger burned through her, hot and relentless, and she felt her world shift beneath her feet. For the first time in years, she understood the depth of her own worth, the weight of her own sacrifices, and it stung. It stung in a way she hadn't expected. Sophia could feel her heart pounding in her chest as she folded the paper back into the envelope. She shoved it into her jacket pocket, almost as if she were trying to keep the secret from escaping. But it was too late. The truth had already settled into her bones, a weight she couldn't shake. She didn't even know how to process it. She had given so much of herself, had been so patient, so understanding, and this was how they repaid her, with nothing. Her thoughts were a blur as she sat there, frozen in the stillness of the house. The family she had always known, the family she had loved, had never really seen her. And the reality of that fact hit her harder than any blow ever could. It wasn't just the money, it wasn't just the house. It was the understanding that everything she had done for them, everything she had sacrificed, had been invisible. And now all of it, every ounce of love and care she had given, had been discarded like it meant nothing. She sat there, alone in the darkened kitchen, with the weight of it all pressing down on her chest. How could she keep giving when it felt like no one was ever going to see her again? The days that followed the discovery of the will felt like an endless storm. The weight of the truth Sophia had uncovered sat heavily in her chest, a constant pressure that made every breath feel a little too shallow. She could no longer play the role she had so long been cast in, the dutiful daughter who kept everything running smoothly, quietly, and without question. Now, there was a new weight to bear, the weight of betrayal, of seeing herself so completely erased from the life she had given everything for. She wasn't sure how to move forward. The rage that burned inside her was deep, raw, and painful, and yet She couldn't keep running from it. She couldn't ignore the truth any longer. That night, after days of avoiding eye contact with her parents, Sophia knew she couldn't continue pretending. The silence that hung between them had become unbearable. Every meal, every passing moment, felt like a charade, a performance she could no longer stomach. She had always been the quiet one, the one who kept her feelings hidden away. But now, with everything bubbling to the surface, she realized that hiding from the truth would only destroy her from within. The confrontation came one evening as she sat at the kitchen table, the air thick with tension. Michael was sitting in his usual spot, his eyes glued to the television, a slight frown creasing his face. Sharon was in the kitchen, humming absent-mindedly as she shuffled through the dishes. The house felt too small, too suffocating. Every corner of the room seemed to remind her of the life she had built for them, for her family, and yet, for the first time, she saw it for what it truly was. A house filled with ghosts, a family broken by silence and neglect. She opened her mouth, but the words wouldn't come. It wasn't just anger she felt. It was the sting of being ignored for so long, the bitterness of being overlooked, of sacrificing everything and receiving nothing in return. But then she remembered the will. She remembered what she had read, and suddenly the words rushed out of her like a flood. I found the will. The words hung in the air like a bomb, the weight of them settling over the room. Sharon paused, her hands frozen in midair, and Michael, for the first time in years, turned his attention away from the TV. He looked at her, confused, as if he hadn't heard her correctly. But Sophia wasn't backing down. She had never been more certain in her life. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, her voice shaking but firm. "Why didn't you ever tell me that everything was left to Harper?" Sharon's face went pale, the spoon she had been holding clattering to the sink. For a moment, there was silence. Michael's eyes darted between Sophia and Sharon, unsure of what was happening. He had never been one to talk about emotions, let alone confront uncomfortable truths. His face hardened, the familiar defensive mask slipping into place. "Sophia, that's not," Sharon began, but Sophia cut her off. She had heard enough excuses, enough of their explanations that never seemed to address the real issue, the fact that she had been invisible to them for years. "You left everything to her." Sophia's voice was cold, harder than she had ever intended. But the words had a life of their own now, a force that could not be contained. "Not a single word for me, not a thank you, nothing." Her heart raced, but there was something else, something that wasn't just anger. There was an overwhelming sense of disappointment in herself for not seeing it sooner, for never standing up for herself when she had every right to. She had let them take her for granted, let them see her as nothing more than the one who would always be there to clean up their messes. But that was over now. She couldn't keep doing it. Michael's face flushed, his usual calmness replaced with a rare, fleeting hint of panic. "Sophia, you don't understand." His voice was low, gravelly, as if he was struggling to find the words. "You've always been here. You've always done everything. We ... We thought you'd be okay with it." Sophia's eyes burned, and she couldn't tell if it was from anger or something deeper, something more painful. "You thought I'd be okay with it?" She laughed bitterly, a short, hollow sound. "You thought I'd be okay with giving up my life for you? To keep everything going, to keep you comfortable while I watched my own dreams slip away?" Sharon's eyes welled with tears, but Sophia wasn't looking at her anymore. Her gaze was locked on Michael, the man who had once been her hero, the one who had taught her how to stand tall in the face of adversity, the man who had spent years telling her that she could handle anything, that she could be the strong one. "I've given everything for you, for this family, and you never even saw me." Her voice was raw now, breaking under the weight of the truth. "You didn't even see me, did you?" There was a long pause, a deep silence that filled the room with an unbearable weight. Sharon wiped at her eyes, but her hands shook, and for the first time in as long as Sophia could remember, she felt like her mother was truly seeing her, truly understanding the depth of the hurt. But it was too late. The years of silence, of neglect, could not be erased in an instant. "I didn't know." Sharon's voice trembled, and for the first time, she seemed small. "I didn't know that you felt this way. We didn't mean to ... We never wanted to hurt you." Sophia felt a knot twist in her chest. She had waited for this moment for so long, had hoped that her parents would finally acknowledge the sacrifices she had made, the life she had put on hold for them. But even in this moment, it felt hollow. Their words were too little, too late. "I know you didn't mean to hurt me." "But you did," Sophia whispered, the sharpness of her anger beginning to dull. The exhaustion she had felt for years started to settle into a different kind of sorrow. She wasn't angry anymore. She was grieving for the lost years, for the love she had given so freely without ever asking for anything in return. And as she stood there, in the quiet aftermath of the confrontation, something began to shift inside her. The anger, the resentment, they were still there, but there was something new now. Something that had been buried under the weight of responsibility for so long. It was freedom. Sophia realized that she didn't need their approval, didn't need their validation to be worthy of love or respect. She had given enough of herself to this family, and it was time to take back what was hers. It was time to stop being invisible, to stop being the one who always picked up the pieces. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in years, Sophia felt a sense of clarity. The emotional growth that had been sparked by this confrontation wasn't just about her relationship with her parents. It was about reclaiming herself, about finding the strength to live for her own happiness, to stop carrying the burden of everyone else's life at the expense of her own. And for the first time, she felt a spark of hope that, maybe, she could start to heal. The days following her confrontation with Michael and Sharon felt like the quiet aftermath of a storm. Sophia had braced herself for the fallout, expecting anger, guilt, and perhaps even more distance from her parents. But what she hadn't anticipated, what she hadn't prepared for, was the profound shift that came within her own heart, a shift that pushed her to embrace something she had never allowed herself to fully consider. The possibility of a new life, one where she was no longer defined by the expectations of others. She woke up each day with a strange, almost unfamiliar sense of clarity. The weight that had been pressing on her for so long, years of sacrifice, years of invisible labor, had begun to lift, slowly but steadily. It wasn't a sudden relief, like a moment of dramatic change, but a subtle unburdening, like shedding a skin that had become too tight, too uncomfortable. She had been carrying so much for so long, and now, for the first time, she was giving herself permission to breathe. Her relationship with her parents remained strained. Sharon tried, in her own way, to make amends. There were apologies, hesitant and unsure, from her mother, words that came too late, but still they were words. Michael, too, had apologized, though in his typical, quiet way, as if expressing emotion was a foreign language he was only just learning to speak. But even as they tried to bridge the gap, Sophia couldn't ignore the fact that the damage had been done. She had loved them deeply, had given everything to them, but now she understood that love, no matter how fierce or unconditional, couldn't fill the empty spaces left by years of neglect. She didn't want to cut them off completely. She couldn't do that. They were her family, after all. But for the first time, Sophia found herself setting boundaries. She didn't owe them everything. She didn't have to be their constant caretaker, their emotional support, or their silent provider. She wasn't a machine designed to serve their needs without ever being seen. She was a woman, a person with dreams, desires, and most importantly, a right to live for herself. The emotional weight of this realization was both freeing and terrifying. It was one thing to recognize that she had been giving too much, but it was another thing entirely to step back and embrace her own life. For so long, Sophia had been so immersed in keeping the family afloat, she had forgotten what it meant to have a life outside of that role. Now, she was facing the daunting task of rediscovering who she was, outside of the labels of daughter, caretaker, and silent sufferer. Sophia began to take small steps toward this new beginning. At first, it was just little things: a quiet evening alone with a book she had been meaning to read, a walk in the park without the nagging thought that there was something else she should be doing. But as the days passed, these small acts of self-care began to add up. She started to remember the woman she had been before the weight of responsibility had defined her, the woman she had put aside in favor of her family's needs. She also began to find solace in places she had never thought to look before. She started going to the local art studio, a place she had walked past countless times but never dared to enter. It was there that she rediscovered a love for pottery, a hobby she had long abandoned in favor of more practical pursuits. The feel of the clay between her hands was therapeutic, grounding her in a way she hadn't felt in years. As she shaped the clay into small vases, bowls, and cups, she realized how much she had needed this quiet space where she could create something for herself, without the pressure of doing it for anyone else. Each piece she crafted was a reflection of her own journey, her own process of rebuilding, of reconnecting with herself. But the most profound change came in the form of her relationship with Harper. For years, their bond had been distant, strained by the unspoken truths of their family's dynamics. Harper, the golden child, had always been the one to receive attention, to live a life free of responsibility, while Sophia had carried the weight of their family's struggles on her own. But in the wake of Sophia's confrontation with their parents, something shifted between them. Harper reached out to her, not as the sister who needed rescuing, but as someone who understood. She apologized, not just for her role in their strained relationship, but for the years of silence between them. For the first time, Sophia saw Harper not as the carefree sibling who had always seemed to live in another world, but as someone who had also been affected by their family's dysfunction. They sat together, talking for hours about their childhood, their feelings, their fears. Harper opened up about the guilt she had carried, about how she had felt torn between her own desires and the pressure of being the perfect daughter, and in those conversations, Sophia began to understand that Harper had never asked for the life she had been given either. She had been as much a product of their family's dysfunction as Sophia had. It was in this newfound understanding that their relationship began to heal. They started to lean on each other in ways they never had before. Not as family members who were defined by their roles, but as two women who had both suffered, both grown, and both learned how to stand on their own. Harper didn't ask Sophia to fix anything anymore. She didn't need her to be the one who held everything together. And Sophia, in turn, didn't feel the need to carry the burden for both of them. They could be equals, partners in their own healing, free from the weight of their parents' expectations. For the first time, Sophia felt a sense of peace. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't easy, but she had found her way back to herself. She wasn't just the caretaker anymore. She was Sophia, an individual with her own passions, her own dreams, and her own path to follow. She had begun to write her own story, one that wasn't dictated by the roles her family had forced upon her. And in that story, she wasn't just surviving. She was living, she was rediscovering the joy of creation, the joy of independence, and the joy of being seen not for what she could do for others, but for who she truly was. In the end, Sophia realized that the only person who could truly decide how she lived her life was herself. And for the first time, she chose to live for her own happiness, free from the expectations that had once held her captive. The new beginning wasn't just a new chapter, it was a whole new story, one that was hers to write, and hers alone. Sophia's journey was one of emotional rebirth, one that required her to strip away the layers of obligation, sacrifice, and neglect that had defined her for years. It wasn't just a matter of uncovering a family secret or confronting the deep-seated issues within her relationships. It was about confronting herself, about breaking free from the false narrative she had woven around her role as the unassuming caretaker, the invisible worker, and instead reclaiming her own identity, her own voice, and her own life. The weight of family responsibility can often feel crushing. Many of us grow up believing that we are defined by what we do for others. We carry the burdens of our families, our friends, and society, all while quietly pushing our own needs and desires aside. It's a familiar story, one that countless people, especially women, know all too well. We live in a world where the demands on us never seem to end, and the recognition for our efforts is often absent or too little, too late. For years, Sophia lived in that very cycle. She was the one who did everything, who made sure things ran smoothly, all the while feeling increasingly invisible. Her efforts went unnoticed, unappreciated, and yet she continued, out of a sense of duty, a sense of love that was never reciprocated. And it wasn't until the discovery of the will, a simple piece of paper that exposed the painful truth about her place in her family's eyes, that she was forced to face the full weight of this truth. This moment of reckoning was painful. It shattered the illusion that she had built about her self-worth and role in the family. But in that same breath, it was also the catalyst for her transformation. The very betrayal she had felt, the lack of recognition for everything she had done, became the driving force behind her reclaiming her life. For the first time, Sophia understood that she wasn't bound by her family's expectations. She wasn't defined by the tasks she took on, the things she did for others. She was her own person, with her own desires, her own dreams, and her own path to walk. Sophia's emotional growth came not just from confronting the betrayal of her family, but from confronting the story she had been telling herself all along. She had believed that her worth was tied to her ability to serve, to sacrifice, to put others first. But in the process of facing her pain, she learned a powerful lesson. True fulfillment comes from recognizing your own worth and living authentically, not from the approval or recognition of others. This realization, painful as it was, set her on the path to emotional liberation. She didn't need to be the one who fixed everything for everyone else. She didn't need to be the invisible rock that kept her family together at the expense of her own happiness. She could still love them, still be there for them, but she didn't have to lose herself in the process. The new beginning for Sophia wasn't just about her relationships with her parents or Harper. It was about her relationship with herself. She started to live for her own happiness, to embrace the things that made her feel alive: pottery, independence, peace of mind, and, most importantly, the quiet joy of rediscovering her own identity. It was through this shift in perspective that she was able to heal, not only emotionally, but also spiritually, as she took ownership of her own life. The lessons from Sophia's journey are ones that we can all apply to our own lives. We often spend our lives trying to meet the expectations of others, believing that our value is tied to how much we give, how much we sacrifice. But at some point, we must stop and ask ourselves, what do I need? What do I want from my life? Am I living for someone else's approval, or am I living for my own happiness? The journey to emotional freedom and self-discovery isn't always easy. It's not about suddenly abandoning everyone around you or cutting ties with those who don't appreciate you. It's about finding balance. It's about setting boundaries, healthy, compassionate boundaries, and learning to say no when you need to. It's about recognizing that you are enough, just as you are, without having to prove anything to anyone else. If you find yourself in a similar situation where you feel overlooked, underappreciated, or constantly sacrificing your own happiness for the sake of others, take a moment to reflect. Ask yourself how you can start living for your own happiness. Begin by recognizing your own worth, and then take small steps toward reclaiming the life you deserve. This doesn't mean abandoning responsibility or love for your family, but it does mean rediscovering your own needs and prioritizing your own well-being. Now, let me leave you with a simple question. Do you think it's possible to love and care for others without losing yourself in the process? Please feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear how you navigate relationships while still maintaining your own sense of self. And, if you've found value in this content, I kindly ask that you consider subscribing to the channel and supporting it through a small donation. As someone who's a bit older and still driven by a desire to contribute positively to society, your support, no matter how small, will inspire me to continue creating content that helps others navigate their own challenges and personal growth. Your donation and your subscription help fuel this journey. Let's keep learning, growing, and sharing wisdom together. Thank you so much for your support.